labor management, particularly with respect to unions, and he's been exploring some alternative models to some of the current zeitgeist. And so I will turn it over to Saul. He has his PhD is from MIT. He has undergraduate from Harvard, and it's just my pleasure to introduce Saul Rubinstein.
Thank you, Drew, very much. Thank you for inviting me to be here with you today and to share some of this research. I would welcome a discussion, so I'm going to go through a prepared set of slides that kind of outlines this research trajectory that I've been on with my doctoral student, John McCarthy, and then I want to open it up for discussion and Q&A. So as Drew mentioned, I'm taking more of an industrial relations and organizational approach to the whole question of school reform, and trying to see if there's an alternative to a more narrow focus on market solutions like charters and vouchers or teacher accountability through high-stakes testing. And so what we've been doing is trying to see if there's, in fact, a counter story, an alternative that's really based on the way schools are organized and based on the labor relations between teachers, teachers' unions, and administration. And so what I'm going to show you today is some evidence that we've got from a set of cases across the country that look at collaboration as a model, look at partnerships between labor unions and administration to work together to improve schools, to solve problems, to find new directions, and to innovate. And then I'm going to, so part one of the story is going to be about a set of cases from across the country. And part two is going to be to drill down deep into one of those cases, look at the schools, and see if there's a relationship between institutional partnerships between unions and administration, teacher collaboration at the school level, and student performance. And then I'll conclude with a set of ideas about policy, and then hopefully we can have a discussion about this. So the first phase was to try to identify a set of districts across the country that had been able to establish long-term collaboration, 10 or more years. And we were looking for urban districts, rural districts, represented by both the NEA and the AFT, north and south, east and west, wealthy and poor districts. And we wanted to look inside the dynamics of these districts to see what made for success, what made for long-term sustained partnerships between teachers' unions, teachers, and administration. We got these, the names of these districts by talking to different people, talk to union leaders, talk to administrators, trying to figure out where are the best models, where people continue to talk about sustained collaboration over decades. And what we found in spending time in each of these districts were four themes. All of these districts had partnerships that included the following characteristics. All of them had sustained a crisis that motivated them to collaborate. All of them had focused on strategic priorities. They were looking to collaborate around issues that dealt with student performance and teaching quality. They all had developed infrastructure, structures at the district, at the school, and at the team level, and all of them had a set of common factors that helped to sustain this. So I want to talk about each of these in turn. The first is this idea of a crisis or a pivotal event that motivated collaboration. Every one of these districts had either taken a strike or had taken a strike vote. And so they were really on the precipice of serious adversarial relations. And they realized that while they may have issues in conflict, they also had a lot in common, particularly around the quality of teaching and the quality of student performance, and that they couldn't get there through simply sustaining adversarial relationships. They had to create something new. They had to build on their common interests and use collective bargaining for the issues that they continued to have conflict over. They had to find ways to not allow strikes or other pivotal events to derail them, and they were looking for opportunities to do things differently. The second set of common characteristics had to do with an emphasis on strategic priorities. They were focused on the quality of the system. They were interested in doing substantive problem solving. They were willing to experiment. They were willing to innovate, and they did it around these kinds of areas: curriculum development, new forms of evaluation, implementing peer assistance and review systems, implementing new kinds of mentoring, jointly develop professional development, K-12 articulation, cross-disciplinary integration, particularly at the middle school level, new kinds of scheduling, new teacher orientation, new forms of coaching, the creation of teaching academies, textbook selection, instructional practice, creating consulting teacher networks, planning technology. That list was all done jointly. In all these districts, none of those items were done simply by administration. They took them on as joint activities. And they focused on student performance, on database decision-making, and on a way to align goals between administration and the union. Let me give you some examples. ABC Unified District, which is the district I'm going to show you more details about in a little while, is south of Los Angeles. They jointly developed reading programs in 6 schools on the south side of the district, the poorer side of the district, where they had a high percentage of students that were English language learners. They implemented peer assistance and review, which I don't know if people know what that is, but it's a mentoring program that substitutes for the evaluation system, where teachers are identified as master teachers. They get 3 years out of the classroom to be consulting teachers. They work together full-time as consulting teachers. They take on new hires and mentor them. They're in the classroom with them. They help them prepare lessons. They evaluate them. And then when it comes time to decide whether they're retained by the district, it's the consulting teacher network in conjunction with administration that decides whether teachers stay on. So it's rigorous. It's in-depth. There's a lot of time and investment put in, and they have excellent results in terms of developing teachers. And I see the pizza has arrived. So now I'm competing. Should I take a break for a moment while people get there, or should I continue?
They'll just mosey on.
They've got mosey here? Okay.
Yeah, well, they were instructed to.
Norfolk, Virginia, mentoring programs, developing joint leadership teams, developing joint teams to evaluate student performance data. Hillsborough, Florida, which I know you may know is one of the Gates deep dive sites. School improvement process teams, Center for Technology and Education developed jointly, school advisory councils. Every textbook that's selected is done jointly. None of this is done simply by administration. In Toledo, they invented the Peer Assistance and Review Program 30 years ago, which includes, as I just mentioned, peer support, mentoring, professional development, and a consulting teacher network. Plattsburgh in upstate New York, a district-wide improvement council, again, joint textbook selection, joint professional development, joint development of evaluation, mentoring, peer coaching, long-range technology planning. All of these activities are done jointly. And finally, St. Francis in Minnesota, they developed jointly a teacher academy to hire new teachers and then support, mentor, and develop them. Student performance improvement planning, and teams at the school level, the department level, and the peer group level, all around student performance. The third factor had to do with an infrastructure. So this is not simply about a superintendent and a union leader saying we're going to work together. This is about building structures throughout the district that facilitate that institutionalize it. All of these districts reported an organizational culture of collaboration and inclusion. We kept hearing people say to us, we just make decisions this way. We do this jointly. It's just the way things are done here. It becomes part of the culture, becomes embedded. It's not contractual. It's simply the way they operate, the way they do business. They share governance. Management is seen not as a class of employee, but as an activity everybody has to engage in, including teachers and union leaders. They have collaborative structures at all levels, including joint building teams, school improvement committees, leadership teams, grade level and data adoption teams. They use site-based decision-making. And one interesting thing we found was that they had a lot of a substantial amount of joint learning opportunities. And what I mean by that is, for example, the ABC district in California would send people every year, multiple times, across the country to attend seminars at Harvard, in New York, for the Center for School Improvement, in Washington, for the AFT's Teach Conference, for their Union Leadership Institute. We counted 400 people who had been sent over the years, teachers and administrators, together to learn together and to build relationships together. So what you know is human capital and how you relate to your coworkers is social capital. And they built both by these joint learning opportunities. It wasn't simply people going to gain a particular set of skills. It was they were going as teams, as collaborators, to learn, and in that they strengthened their relationship and they strengthened their knowledge. And we saw that the union in all of these cases had taken on the responsibility for quality. They saw that it was essential to their mission, that the quality of teaching and the quality of what happened in the classrooms and student performance was their mission as well. And so they were really the hub of a network to improve quality. And I just mentioned a number of the things on here, which is that essentially these partnerships became the way to implement changes in the district. They became the hub of a network for innovation and reform. And finally, the fourth characteristic has to do with how these were sustained. Community was involved and supportive. Parents were very interested and were in the schools. Support from the Board of Education. These districts, there were a couple districts that had elected boards, appointed boards by mayors, but most of these districts had elected boards, and the union had gotten involved in board elections. At first, they supported candidates who were supportive of hiring administrators who wanted to collaborate with teachers and with unions. But beyond that, many of these unions actually ran their own candidates, recruited people from the community who wanted to see collaboration, and then supported them throughout the election process. So they saw it as a legitimate activity for the union to become increasingly involved in board elections so that the boards would hire superintendents who wanted to work together with the union. What was also really interesting is the tenure of superintendents. The superintendents that we looked at here had come up through the district. They had been former teachers, often former union leaders. Several were the heads of negotiation and then moved into administration and then moved up as principals, then into central office, and then became superintendents. So they had deep roots in those districts. They were known. They understood the culture. They understood who they were working with as partners. And I think that's so different from many districts that we see. I served as a school board member locally, and the tenure, it seemed to me, was about 2.5 years. And I don't think that's uncommon in New Jersey. Here you had people that had been in the district for decades. Same thing with union leaders. We saw union leaders who had been in place as president, in some cases for decades. And so had been able to develop these working relationships over time, had trust in their partners, and also had planned for succession on both sides. So there was a deep bench for the union, there was a deep bench for administration, and when people retired, people that came in continued to maintain these collaborative approaches to running the district. Support from the national union was important. They got resources, they got technical help, in some cases they got consulting help to create these partnerships. And they also got technical help on other issues. One district who was trying to figure out how to improve reading scores couldn't figure out what programs they could find on their own, contacted the national union, who sent them to Houston, of all places, and where they could examine a set of reading programs for English language learners. They adopted those, and that was help that the administration saw they couldn't have come up with on their own, and so they saw the national union as a resource as well. And in some cases, supportive contract language, but most of the time, these arrangements were created not through contracts. The contracts simply memorialized what was already going on in terms of who was involved in decision-making at different levels. So now I'm going to shift gears, because you may say, okay, fine, you've got a bunch of districts across the country that work together, so what? What's the big deal? You know, they can hold hands, they can sing Kumbaya, they can have pizza together, but does it make a difference for the kids? So as a second phase of this research, we decided we wanted to actually answer that question. So we chose the ABC Unified District, which is in LA County, south of Los Angeles. 30 schools, 900 educators, 46% qualify for reduced or free price lunch, so you've got a fair amount of poverty in the district. It was one of our case studies. And we used several kinds of data. We had the California Academic Performance Index, the API, which is a combination of standardized tests in math, English, social studies, and science, also factors in graduation and dropout rates. We had a survey that was done internally on the school climate, and that also had questions about how teachers felt around this partnership, this collaborative approach to running the district. And we did a network survey, social network survey, in which we asked every educator in the district, union and administration, who do you speak with on a daily basis? What are the topics that you talked about? We were particularly interested in conversations they had with each other about student performance data, mentoring, instructional practice, and curriculum or articulation. We asked about whether that was formal or informal. We asked about trust in those communications. And we did this by, we launched this through a website that we created. Teachers were asked to log on. They were given a roster of everybody in their school. There was a drop-down menu, and they could simply check on the people that they had communication with in their school, but also choose people outside the school because we were interested in communications, inter- and intra-school communications. So that's what we found. That partnership quality on the x-axis, from low partnership to high partnership on a 4-point scale, had a strong association with performance improvement. And you could see that every time you moved up one level on partnership quality, you moved up 15 points on the API score. It was statistically significant, but we controlled for this percentage of students on reduced or free price lunch. So in fact, we were controlling for poverty, and we could explain 54% of the variation in API improvement based on this fact. So we see a strong, statistically significant association between the quality of the partnership in the school as perceived by the teachers and the achievement by the students in that school on the API, both for 2012 and for improvement 2011 to 2012. So preliminary. We see partnership quality leading to performance improvement. It's a statistically significant association. Partnership can account for 76 points on API, moving from a low of 1 to a high of 4. And it can account for 45 points in improvement from 11 to 12, going from 1 to 4. Now, just to kind of put those improvements in some kind of a context, we also found that poverty has a big impact on student test scores. A 1% decrease in poverty in this district would increase the API score by 2.23 points. So a similar district, if you move from 100% poverty, 100% students on reduced or free price lunch, to 0, you would gain on average 223 points per school. But as I reported at the beginning of this section, the average poverty rate in the school is about 46%, 45.5. So if we eliminated poverty in this district, on average, schools would increase their test scores by 101 points. Which should be done? Tough problem. If you could move all the schools to a high partnership, you'd gain 76 points. Not as much as 101, but not so far off. We should be doing both, right? So for those that say poverty is the only problem, we're arguing, wait a second, this is a way to also improve student performance by enhancing the collaboration, and the antecedent to that are these institutional partnerships. But we should be doing both. Poverty, as many write, is critical, and we can see it is the most significant factor in the district. So we should be doing both. But I show you this and compare it to the statistics on poverty to show you that it also is a significant factor. We then looked at the relationship between partnership quality and school-level teacher communications. So we wanted to see if partnership quality affected communications on the school level, and we looked at 4 particular issues: the communications among teachers and between teachers and principals on student performance data, the conversations between teachers and principals on curriculum development or cross-subject integration or grade-to-grade articulation, the communications around sharing, advising, and learning around instructional practices, or giving and receiving formal and informal mentoring. We looked at all of those. They all tracked in the same way, so we combined them into a single variable. And here I show you the comparison between the partnership level as reported by the faculty in each school, the bottom third on the left, the top third in partnership on the right. And you can roughly see that on average, the communication density in the high partnership schools is twice what the communication density is in the low partnership schools, right? It's about 16% in the low partnership schools. It's about 30% in the high partnership schools. So what we're seeing is the density of communication. Density here is simply a fraction. It's of all the possible links or communication links you could have in a school, how many are actually reported to be used. And so we used our social network analysis. We used UCINet to analyze the data. And so we could tell the density in each school. And we know what the performance on API is for each school. And so if you break it into the top third, middle third, and bottom third, and we're comparing the top third and the bottom third on partnership, we see a statistically significant difference in teacher communication with each other, teacher collaboration at the school level. So the communication density has an impact on student performance and on performance improvement from 2011 to 2012. For example, if we moved from a school communication density of 16%, which is the average in the low partnership group, to 30%, which is the average in the high partnership group, API scores would go up by 10 points. If we move from communication density of 16% to 58%, and we had schools that were above 58%, we would have an increase of 31 points in API. The last thing I want to show you has to do with the labor relations in the school. And here we're looking at the relationship between the principal and the building rep. Building rep is the union delegate responsible for that building. And so we thought, let's take a look at the institutional collaboration at a building level between the union delegate, the union representative, and the principal. And so we asked about these communications because we had data in our social network analysis about who was talking to who, how frequently, and whether it was formal or informal or both. So what we see here on the left is the high partnership schools. And what we see here in green is a report that 58% of the communications in the high partnership schools between principals and building rep take place on a daily basis. In other words, 58% of building reps are talking with their principals on a daily basis in the high partnership schools. The other 42% are talking at least weekly. If we compare that to the low partnership schools, which is the pie chart on your right, you'll see only 17% of the union reps are talking with the principals on a daily basis. 33% are only talking monthly at the formal faculty meeting. Right? So it's a and the differences here, again, are statistically significant. So what we see here is a pattern where the high partnership schools have much higher frequency communication between the principals and the building rep than do the low partnership schools. This has to do with how the communications take place. Are they formal, meaning in a faculty meeting, or are they scheduled in advance, or are they informal, meaning I catch somebody in the hall, I see that there's pizza in the room and the principal's in there, and I walk in because I smell it, and I have a conversation. I catch somebody in their office, catch somebody in the cafeteria. So that'd be informal versus formal meetings, or both. And what we see, again, is that the high partnership schools have both formal and informal, whereas the low partnership schools, 25% of the building reps say they only talk to the principals formally at faculty meetings. So here's the difference, and again, statistically significant difference. So what we're painting a picture of here is that high partnership schools are associated with more frequent communication between the union reps and the principals and more informal communication between the building reps and the principals. So the conclusions. From a performance point of view, high partnership schools have a statistically significant positive impact on student API performance in 2012 and on performance improvement from 2011 to 2012. Around communications, high partnership schools have denser teacher-principal communication networks around student performance data, curriculum, articulation, advising and instructional practice, and mentoring. The arrow seems to have jumped up that says dense teacher communication networks lead to increased performance and performance improvement. In other words, there's a statistically significant association between the density of communication at the school level and student performance at the school level. High partnership schools have structurally different patterns of union management collaboration. The union rep and the principal communications in high partnership schools are more frequent and less formal than in low partnership schools. And the partnership is essentially working as a hub of a network that facilitates teacher to teacher and teacher to principal communication and collaboration, and this adds value to school system improvement. So what are the policy implications here? That, first of all, that this idea of creating a different climate in the schools, of creating an institutional partnership between unions and administration, is an alternative to what we see coming out of Washington and out of Trenton, which focuses on narrow market strategies such as charters and vouchers, or narrow testing and accountability strategies. The tests show gaps, but they don't show how to fill the gaps. They show deficiencies, but they don't give solutions. These partnerships are built around solving problems. These partnerships are built about identifying a problem, like we've got a reading issue in the 6 schools on the poor side of the ABC Unified School District. How are we going to solve that? Let's get together and come up with some new reading programs. And then they do that, and then they find that that works, so they do more. And they, over 20 years, built a collaborative environment where all problems move in that direction. We have to remove barriers to generic top-down prescriptive policies that can limit innovation. We've got to find ways to build upon, support, and cultivate local innovation. School reform policy should create incentives for collaboration around evaluation, mentoring, professional development, peer assistance, and review. We should find ways to give mandate relief for those districts that are finding ways to collaborate in order to reform. We should build incentives for pilot innovations. We should build dense networks of professionals and a culture of collaboration by motivating longevity and the use of internal labor markets. Internal labor markets is industrial relations jargon from hiring from within, right? That those superintendents that were so effective because they were used to teach in the district and they had relationships and they had an understanding and they were part of a culture, that adds value as well. We need institutional support. We should create learning networks across districts that are interested in collaborative approaches, and we should link experienced districts with inexperienced ones. The district that I talked about in California now has a set of a half a dozen districts around them that are coming to them for help. And the leadership, both union and administration, are visiting those other districts and helping them to move in this direction. We should get state-level resources to build capacity, training, skill development, facilitation. We should have state and regional conferences to demonstrate collaborative approaches to school improvement, to provide technical assistance to highlight best practice. And we should continue research on innovation networks and share those findings. I used to do a lot of work in the private sector, manufacturing, steel, auto, pharmaceuticals, healthcare. And one of the lessons that we learned from the private sector, particularly from manufacturing reform in the 80s and 90s, is that it can't be top-down. It's got to be bottom-up as well. That when you force top-down and you are overly prescriptive, you can kill off innovation at the local level. And so what we need is enabling language in policy that helps to foster innovation that is locally grown rather than quashing it through prescriptive mandates. And we also know that innovation is not going to diffuse or be sustained without widespread policy support from the state and federal level. Next steps in our work, my work with John McCarthy, we now have data from multiple districts. We're examining patterns of grade and subject level collaboration and student performance, because what I presented here today was really school level, right? And that's kind of a gross measure. We now want to look at collaboration among English teachers, collaboration among science teachers, among math teachers, among social studies teachers, and across teams at the middle school level of language arts, math, social studies, and science who are working together around a group of students to see how that kind of collaboration impacts student performance. We're also looking at interschool networks. We're looking at the relationship between one school and another in the district to see what kind of learning and sharing takes place there. Some preliminary findings suggest that that where you have union reps who are active in their communication with other schools. You have a higher level of innovation sharing among teachers school to school. So we'll pursue that more if I'm ever invited back. Maybe I can give you some updated information. And we've also begun to develop a collaborative school reform learning network in New Jersey. So we've been meeting over the last 9 months or so. We have all of this research has been funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We have some pilot money from the Gates Foundation to create this network. It includes now representatives from the New Jersey State School Boards Association, New Jersey Principals Association, New Jersey Superintendents Association, the New Jersey Education Association, and the New Jersey AFT. And we are running a conference next week where we're going to bring the superintendent and the principal from the ABC district from California in to talk about their experience in collaboration to implement the Common Core curriculum. And at that meeting will be representatives from all of those stakeholders I just mentioned. I heard yesterday that the New Jersey State Department of Education is going to be attending as well as we hope about 25 district leaders, union and superintendent teams. And I know Drew will be there, and hopefully other colleagues from GSE, to talk about what can be learned from examples of collaboration and how that can be used to implement Common Core, and what we might do at a state level to support that, and also what individual districts might do to learn from that. So we're looking for opportunities for mutual learning, to share experiences, and to include all stakeholders. So that's my story. I'd be very interested in reactions. And in some ways, I think it probably suggests things that you already knew, which is that education is not an individual enterprise, it's a collaborative enterprise. And so what we need is to find ways to support that collaboration. And essentially, these partnerships are antecedents to school-level collaboration. And when you do that, you can have measurable results. And so we just try to track that and measure it. So with that, I hope I haven't run over the...
No, that's great, so thank you so much.
So I'd like to have a conversation, Q&A, more pizza. Yes?
Sure, I have two questions. First of all, how can I find out about your conference next week? Because I would like to attend it, so maybe I'll just follow up with you on that one. And my second question was about that ABC district. I'm very interested about the teacher leader, teacher evaluation model that they're putting forth. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. And actually, the ABC is not, you might think I disguised the case by calling it ABC. It actually is ABC. They chose, it's a unified district, and it's Artesia, Bloomfield, and Cerritos, or something like that. So they adopted this, actually it came from Toledo, Ohio, where it was created about 30 years ago. And it's called Peer Assistance and Review. It's been adopted in districts across the country. And it essentially creates a consulting teacher network of master teachers. They're given additional professional development. They become really terrific. And every time there's a new hire, they're assigned to one of these teachers. And these teachers consult with them. They help them shape lesson plans. They observe them. They give them feedback. And they work with them over a 3-year period. You might also have experienced teachers who are running into difficulty, either because the supervisor identifies them or they self-identify, or maybe they're changing into a new subject or a new grade level, and they can come in and get help as well. And so it's essentially mentoring over a long period of time. But then when the evaluation takes place about whether they're going to be tenured, the consulting teacher is part of that evaluation. So they're pretty rigorous. And the focus here is on how to get people to be as good as they can rather than on dismissal, right? So there's a huge investment. But I observed it. I actually watched the review process. And you couldn't tell in that review process who was administration and who was faculty from the rigor of what was being said and the evaluations that take place. I can get you information on that if you're interested.
Yes,
or if you come to the conference, you can talk to the superintendent and the union president about what they did in their peer assistance and review process.
Because it wasn't a problem with the union having union members observing and...
No. I mean, they figured out there was more value in doing it that way and having more input and control over helping people to become as good as they can. than rather than worry about the decision process. And if they did a good job in preparing people and gave them every opportunity to get as good as they can, and it was a fair system, they were much better with that than being in a position to defend a poor teacher or not counsel somebody out that needs to be counseled out, right? So the resources were put in up front, and this is not the highest paying district in Southern California, but they've got hundreds of people every time they offer a position because it's such a good place to work. That's the reputation. And you get such help in becoming an excellent teacher.
Well, thank you for this, and thank you for the research. I mean, it's refreshing to hear some good news about union and labor relations. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I want to echo those comments. Thanks. This is a great presentation, very optimistic and positive, and that's great. I had two questions. First of all, I'm not sure of the demographics of all of the work you presented, that what the demographics were of all of your school systems, but did you see a difference between the urban and the suburban schools that you studied, if you did study different schools with different demographics? And just the second one was, is there a parent involvement component either in it now or in the future?
Yeah, the answer to both of those is yes. We looked at urban and at rural, and we found strong partnerships in both that followed the same pattern. So this is really something about institutions and about organization. And we didn't see it. I mean, certainly there are big differences between urban and rural schools, but on this matter, we found the same patterns, whether that was urban schools that we found in California or in Toledo, Ohio, or in Tampa, or whether it was rural schools up in Plattsburgh, New York, or St. Francis, Minnesota. The same patterns of what it took to establish it and to sustain it were there. Those same four that I said at the outset. And yes, the community was involved. You've got community involvement in the schools. You've got parents in these schools, parents supportive of teachers, parents involved in the school board, and the union out in the community, because if the union is helping to influence who's on the school board, they need to be out in the community, and they need to be showing the value that they add to the school districts as they recruit parents in. So the answer is yes on both cases. Yes, sir.
Amongst those four factors, the first was sort of this crisis that had, and I was hoping you could sort of comment more on what your ideas are of implementing similar things in a non-crisis situation, since hopefully we don't have to create a crisis everywhere.
No one should walk away from here saying that I'm advocating strikes. That's not the message of this research. Looking historically, we found crises, but a lot of these have started in the 80s and 90s, right? I think there is a crisis in public education. I think no one needs to be convinced of that. I think that people realize there's a crisis, and we're at that place, and people are looking for solutions. So in discussions and in creating this learning network in New Jersey, we see districts saying, we want to do this, and align, saying, look, we've got a lot on our plate between the Common Core, between the evaluation system. We need to work together on this. And so I don't see an issue with that first characteristic. I think people already see the common interests. They already see the crisis. They're trying to find alternatives. They're not quite sure how to structure. And I think that's where I think this kind of a network where one district can help the other. Essentially, we're doing mentoring on a district level. I think that can be put in place. Did you have a follow-up?
I'm just sort of interested in sort of the incentive that a district in one side of the country has for helping improve things other than sort of goodwill. Is there anything else put in place other than?
I think that these folks are coming next week. They're traveling across the country on the last day of school, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people are unwilling to leave a district on the last day of school, and these folks are leaving the state on the last day of school because they want to share their experience, because they were helped by others, because they want to pass it forward, right? Mm-hmm. And so, and I think also they realize they're going to learn from other people's experience. And when we have conferences, we ran a national conference on this in DC a couple of years ago. We brought in cases, and people have continued to say, oh, how did you solve this problem? Or what did you work on here? And so we think that a network can be really helpful here, where one district, even if their experience doesn't have all the solutions, then they can learn from other districts. I also think you need a critical mass, because if you're going to use this as an alternative to some of the other kinds of policy mandates, you need enough districts that are saying, this really works. We've got evidence that this works. We've got better labor relations. We've got teachers that feel better about the environment that they're teaching in. We've got higher quality student performance and performance improvement. You need enough districts doing that to support innovation here and policy support here, rather than forcing everybody to take, a one-size-fits-all solution. So I think that people are interested in that as well. Yeah. Yes.
I was just curious to hear more about how you measure the partnership quality and whether you talked about level of collaboration and communication, but I'm wondering about concession. Like, did you sort of measure or compare what kinds of concessions were being made on either side from?
We weren't looking at concessions. We were really looking at do people feel that there's an environment where their voice is heard, where they're able to contribute to decisions, where they're able to contribute to problem solving, where they see a collaborative environment with the administration. We looked at assessments by the administration and by the union leadership of where they thought the partnership was. Or we looked at multiple measures. We measured the amount of collaboration between the building rep and the principal in each school. So we were looking for quantitative measures. We were looking for qualitative measures to try to see if we could judge the level of partnering. In some ways, it's an institutional partnership. The union and the administration are saying, we're going to work together. Some of them write it into the contract. Some of them develop a charter. But there's also individual partnering. And as the folks next week are going to say, this superintendent and this union president see each other as partners. They meet every week. In fact, they have a weekly meeting, and it happens on Wednesday. I'm calling them during that meeting to talk about the agenda for next week. And I know I'm going to be able to get them on a Wednesday at 4 o'clock East Coast time because they're always together, right? So there's individual partnering and there's institutional. So we tried to measure it by the network analysis we did, but we tried to measure it by the climate survey, and we tried to do it by interviewing leaders to say, tell us about each school, and here's what we're seeing in the data. Does that line up with what you see?
I was curious at the teacher level in terms of the increased collaboration, because I think that would really have a significant impact on sort of. Yeah.
So there was variation school to school on how teachers saw that. As you could see in the data, some were high partnership schools and some were low partnership schools, even in a district that had said we want to move in this direction. Yeah. True.
Yeah, so you've got these large differences in achievement between these high and low collaborative environments, and you haven't yet, but it sounds like you want to start doing some more longitudinal analysis, right, to look at changes. But if you had to place your bets, like where do you think the changes are occurring? Is it in the classroom practice? Is it that they're actually being able to recruit and make better employment decisions about individuals? Is it more programmatic kinds of coherence?
I think it's in the practices in the classroom. I think it's in the mentoring. I think it's in the sharing of instructional practice. I think it's on the collaboration interdisciplinary at the middle school level between multidisciplinary teams, or on the articulation. So I think that comes from just being in these schools and talking to people, and even coming up with those questions about what we would ask. We actually did interviews and sat in and said, what helps you in collaboration? What do you talk about? And those 4 areas came out of that. So then we put them into the survey to actually measure and test them. So I think it's not about the hiring, because I think once they hire, this peer assistance and review helps them along. But I think it's really about, do we have time to sit together? What are we talking about? I think a lot about, the research on Finland, right? They got 20 hours a week to work with each other.
Right, but if it's a more attractive workplace, you can, you can select more individuals. If there's a high-performing system, maybe people opt out. So.
Yeah. But they have very low turnover here among teachers. They really retain them. They hire good people because they can be selective, not because of the money. Mm-hmm. Yet, even on this, as California's hit budget crisis over the last year, they had no layoffs in this district because they worked together to figure out a way to keep people. And they found collaborated on ways to cut in other directions. Districts all around them had to send out pink slips for teachers. So, they develop a reputation. This is a good employer. It's a good place to work. So they got good people coming in. They can be selective. And they then train people so that they really are effective. But I think that what's happened, but yet that's true across all the schools in the district. So the differences here, I think, are on this collaboration. And that's what the data show. More collaboration in those schools that are higher performing.
And what about retention patterns of the chief school administrators? Are those different?
No, because the superintendent had come up through the ranks. The previous superintendent had been the union bargainer. I mean, so we've got a set of superintendents who have handed off when they have, having all come up through the district. And it's not what we often see in New Jersey, which is every couple of years you bring in a new. So these people were homegrown and developed, and you can see who the successors are going to be. So I think that on both the union and the administrative side, you've got stability there and trust. Maybe I haven't used the word trust here, but you pick up a sense that there's trust here. I know these people. I've worked with them a long time. I've watched what they do, because the way you test the trust is not on the good times. It's what happens when it's bad times, and you could make a decision which would be in your advantage, but not in your partner's, and you don't take that decision, right? So in these times of hard finances, keeping everybody employed, that creates a lot of trust, right? But I think our data on additional districts and we now have data on evaluations, value-added assessments, as well as the qualitative. So I think that'll be a richer database as well, and we'll be able to tell more about the question that you asked. Yes, sir.
So it seems that a lot of the federal and state policy pushes have kind of expected demonstrable results in 3 to 5 years from school reform. And so have you been working to, I guess, look at schools that rapidly increase their partnership quality to see whether or not your expected changes in the API scores or other performance levels have come through as well?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking to see that, and it's not clear yet what performance gains we're going to see from the other policy initiatives that have been pushed, right? And if we don't see big gains after spending $4.35 billion, right? People are going to be saying, what do we do, right? And so we're hoping that, as we continue in this research, if we're able to demonstrate that you can get improvement through collaboration, that this could be an alternative, a counter story. We'll see. Yes.
Have you encountered any reaction from the National Education Association?
Yeah, I mean, right now, NEA, AFT are all supportive of this direction. In New Jersey, at this meeting next week, I mean, we've had NEA, NJEA, and NJAFT support. In the conference in 2010, when we presented the first part of this, which was not the data but the case studies, we ran a national conference on collaborative school reform, and our partners in that, Rutgers partnered with Cornell, MIT, and the American Federation of Teachers, and we presented these cases in Washington. The Department of Ed then said, oh, we'll run a national conference as well, and so they've run 2 now, looking at collaboration, but I don't know how much they are pushing this approach at the present time, given their other policy priorities. But yes, I think both NEA and AFT are very interested in this.
Okay, thank you so much, Saul. This is great.